So just a quick overview of the agenda. So I will go through 15 minutes about Vocareum, and the assumption here is that that this would be targeted at people who don't know Vocareum at all. And then we'll go ahead and do a demo, and then we will open it up for Q&A. And at some point, I think we are doing a drawing for a winner for our gift basket. In terms of if some of you, if you have attended webinar, the way we are doing it right now, that we are cycling through essentially 3 topics. One is we are talking about a Vocareum overview, and then we have some focused webinars on our data science labs or our cloud computing labs. So this one is going to be hopefully giving you an idea about sort of the entire breadth of our portfolio. If you have any questions, please go ahead and during the webinar, please go ahead and use the Q&A function. That'd be great. And someone will try to respond to you while the webinar is, while one of us is doing the presentation. So with that, what does Vocareum provide? So we provide virtual labs. And what we mean by virtual labs is this is the space where someone can specify for a user, typically it's a teacher or an admin specifying for a learner, saying where the space has data, compute, guardrails. And by guardrails, we mean that you can specify, if it's a cloud computing lab, you can specify what resources you can launch. For compute, you can specify what packages are installed, and you can deliver data to the lab in various ways. And Vocareum will worry about things like provisioning. So we'll go ahead, and when the learner comes in, we'll provision the right resource and make it available all through a browser. We'll worry about persistence, and by persistence, the big thing here is the data persistence, to make sure that when the user comes in, we preserve the data in the least expensive way as possible without keeping the compute running. And also, we have a fairly large amount of enterprise capability, and we are doing more and more. A couple of them we talk about is like roles and identity. So for example, there are multiple roles, like there's some built-in roles like admins and teacher and learner, but also we are getting more and more requests to add custom roles to our platform from our enterprise customers. So for example, you can have a role that they can only see the dashboard. That was one of or they can only provide support to the students, but not actually being able to change some higher level configurations. What I mean by identity here is that we can sort of serve the identity either through Vocareum's own, or through SAML or LTI, or through our REST API. So different ways we can authenticate the user and the roles on the platform. Some other enterprise capabilities that we don't talk about here that we have been developing, for example, we're getting more and more requests for analytics. So not only we have built our own dashboard, but we have also built a data pipeline. So for your own, essentially, you can dump it in your own warehouse. So every day we'll provide fairly detailed data in our data pipeline, which then you can use it for a downstream processor, either through analytics or your machine learning workloads. So hopefully this gives you a sense of the enterprise capabilities and what you provide from a learner perspective as well from an admin perspective. What's unique about Vocareum? We do think that we have right now the broadest category of labs that are available in the market. So you can find a vendor, maybe you can provide you some compute lab or maybe some VDIs, but we do provide, as you'll hopefully get a sense of it later on, just a very broad category of labs. And also our labs were designed to be tightly integrated with different experiences. So we realized from day one that labs alone are not enough, at least in the educational environment. So we were designed it to be integrated. So you can drop these labs in either in your own app or maybe your learning management system. Network level isolation for compliance. So these labs are designed to be enterprise grade, which means that your enterprise might have a requirement because maybe you're launching some commercial tools, or maybe you're bringing some proprietary data sets. So you can actually launch these, as we'll talk about a little bit more, in your own isolated networks. These were designed for education, so they do come built in with a large assessment suite. So every lab can be either run as a as a standalone sandbox, or you can bring in lots of different collaboration and assessment capability. And there's a flexible deployment model. So we provide a lot of managed applications where we keep track of all the sort of packages and tools and operating system upgrade, but you can also bring your own applications and images, and hopefully we'll dive into this a little bit more details. So this is sort of give you a sense of these are the fully managed labs. So this is where Vocareum is managing everything, including the tool, the interfaces and packages. So the first two are the biggest one for Vocareum. One is our Jupyter labs and our cloud computing labs. So when we say Jupyter lab, that is our hub. Not only you can run a Jupyter notebook, but also you can deliver to the learner different databases, and they can launch different jobs. Cloud computing, we have about 1 million learners which are actively enrolled in Vocareum at any given point of time, and half of them actually learning cloud computing right now. Especially AWS, we have a really large set of deployment. And cybersecurity, this is becoming bigger and bigger. So you can deploy a personal cyber range for the learner, which could mix and match different tools and OSs that we provide. Big data, what we mean specifically here is that a Spark cluster, which is we have some built-in Spark cluster which you can launch your jobs on. By machine learning, once again, it means that you can launch the jobs, maybe a training job on a GPU. Kubernetes, so this is from a DevOps perspective. You can deploy quite a bit of right now classes are going on where the learners are learning how to deploy Kubernetes cluster in their enterprises. Programming, so we will deliver a large set of different IDEs and for different languages. So you can learn, for example, Python or HTML, CSS, Java, lots of different languages, and the ID types are options are either Vocareum has our built-in ID, but we provide Spider, Eclipse, VS Code, IntelliJ, etc. Full stack, this is where you might learn maybe a CI/CD flow, and so typically, so we have a Docker container where you can, in one interface, you can actually build your application, and then there's a desktop interface where you can launch a browser to go ahead and access maybe a server that was launched. There are 4 databases that we provide built in. So with a single click, you can provide to your learner a MySQL, Postgres, Neo4j, or DynamoDB. These databases can be initialized, and we'll provide with your SQL command, and it can will provide administration level access, root access to these databases. So just a couple of slides to go into a little bit more detail on our 2 labs that I was talking about, which are data science lab and the cloud computing lab. So for data science lab, we run Jupyter notebooks. Again, lots of different kernels that are available for Jupyter notebooks, so including R, or obviously the Python is the biggest one, but there are C++ kernels and R kernels and Go and Scala kernels. And you can deliver data via various sources. You can deliver the database credential from the previous slide. You can upload a large data set, or you can deliver data through some, say, a cloud object store, for example, AWS S3. And you can use it to either run compute locally, but also we can provide credentials for, let's say, a Spark cluster that I was mentioning, or maybe even a AWS credential. So the jobs can be launched maybe in a built-in service, or on a cluster which is launched by managed by Vocareum. Data science labs also, they come in built in with some assessment and collaboration capability. The biggest one which gets used a lot is NB Grader. So it's NB Grader, if you're not familiar with it, it's an open source framework for assessment, and you can provide inline code comments. I think I already talked about integrated data sources and how you can manage a Spark cluster and cloud credentials. And this is, we see as a hub Our Jupyter lab we see as a hub where we'll continue to integrate data sources, compute sources. So for example, data warehouse integration is becoming more and more asked more and more, that can you integrate with a data warehouse source, say for example, Snowflake, or proprietary data sources. So maybe it's not open source data is not enough. Maybe you need to bring in a credentials to a proprietary data source. So we are working on those as a part of our roadmap, and integration with analytics tools. So maybe after you're done with the analysis, you need to go and launch a Power BI or a Tableau. So we're sort of trying to, so we're going to do more and more integration to give you an end-to-end data science capability. Cloud computing, as I was saying, this is one of our largest labs out there, which is so more than 500,000 learners are using it for either learning cloud computing or using cloud computing. So to make it work, we have, you can basically provide a constrained environment, and the constraint, we built in all sorts of ways to how you can provide, manage the environment so that so the expenses don't blow up. So you can specify policies and time and budget, and you can, we can provide, we do some concurrency checks, but also there are capabilities like CloudFormation. So you can use that to pre-build, to deliver a pre-built starting point to the learner. We can deliver, we drop a credential for CLI automatically in your work environment. So maybe you can integrate that as a part of your workflow. And so just to give you, this is a summary of all the different kind of, from a technology perspective, what we have. So we have some managed applications that I talked about it. We have cloud labs, and this is not good enough. You can bring your own Docker images, and we launch a network of that and manage provisioning and scaling, as well as persistence. And you can do the same thing for network of virtual machines. So you can bring your own AMIs, which you can launch in your own network. And once again, this is, you can either launch this thing in our multi-tenant infrastructure, or you can have a single tenant infrastructure. So I think I've already sort of talked about that single tenant or multi-tenant infrastructure. So if it's single tenant, you can pick the region. If you're using a multi-tenant Vocareum infrastructure right now, we have infrastructure in one running in Oregon, and one running in Ireland. In fact, our Ireland, the EU data center, we just launched last week, and we'll continue to build more and more of those. But if you're using a single tenant, then you can pick any region. And I think sort of already covered most of the points here. Now, here is just the deployment. How is Vocareum being deployed? So one of the biggest one initially was as an assignment on a project in a, let's say, in a self-paced or a residential class. Exams became a big deal, especially during COVID times. So we have lots of exam capability. More and more we are focusing on these training bootcamp and hackathons. So what's common about all this is that there's a live instructor typically, and the learners are working on their labs at the same time. So we are investing more and more in the capability, so that not only there's a scale, make sure everything can be working, but also the instructor can help the learner. Enterprise sandbox. So this is more and more we are seeing this request where enterprises say that I want to provide just sort of a sandbox for my employees, so they can quickly go and maybe prototype something in a cloud environment or a cyber security environment. And so this is another deployment model. Publishing. So maybe if you're so while we started out with lots of, so if more and more in a book or a publishing environment, you have to integrate some lab component. So we're doing that. And virtual campus lab essentially is a replacement for maybe your campus lab. So you can instead of so the learner can go there and basically launch any of the labs. We are integrated with lots of learning platforms, the Coursera, edX, Emeritus, Great Learning, Simply Learn, Udemy, Udacity. So the integration happens through either LTI 1.1 or 1.3 interfaces. In some cases, our customers have a proprietary application, so they use our API to do the integration. We are there in over 1,000 schools right now, so fairly robust deployment. Assessment, while we might not be able to go through this detail, but we have lots of capability built in because the Vocareum was launched as our first customer base was all universities. So over time, we have deployed all sorts of different assessment capabilities like auto grading, manual grading. There's a built-in plagiarism detection. You can provide inline comments, peer reviews, leaderboard. You can do some gamification. There are some interesting use cases that you can see, case studies you can see on our website. Multiple choice. You can actually, one of the things which we are learning is that some labs, it was too hard to auto grade. And so our customers are asking us like, yeah, I want the learners to start a lab and then answer some questions about it. So we have a nicely integrated multiple choice capability now. Exams, there are lots of exam specific capability, as I mentioned, which learning management, I think already made the point that we are integrated with typically with lots of different learning management systems like Blackboard, edX, Canvas, Moodle, Sakai, Desire to Learn, Coursera, etc. These integrations mostly happen through LTI. REST API, we have a robust REST API, which is being used for, I think, like 2 or 3 reasons. One of them, big one, is that for integrating to your own application, as I was mentioning. But also, let's say if you're managing the course content in your Git repo, then you can use the REST API to push the content to Vocareum. So you don't have to, you can do the development in a comfortable in your environment. So that was sort of my part of the webinar today. And at this point, I would like to hand it off to David for the demo, and I'll be around to obviously answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Sanjay. As Sanjay mentioned, I'm David Lin with Vocareum, here to provide a survey of a few of the virtual labs that Vocareum offers. All of these labs can be used standalone or in the context of an LMS and integrated through LTI. In today's demo, we'll be covering the use of or using Canvas as the vehicle for the student experience here. Our labs are essentially hands-on skills training environments, which can start as an empty sandbox or preloaded with some content and then also protected by policy and budgets. These labs can also serve as graded or ungraded assignments, team projects, or part of the competition platform. So inside this demo, we'll take a look at how we can provision and make cloud computing resources available through the first 2 labs here, this Azure Challenge and the AWS Graded Assignment. We'll also demonstrate how Vocareum can be used in an active and immersive lab environment for learning data science, analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, programming, whatever, right? And in some of these other labs here. And lastly, we'll touch on our cyber range and DevOps labs. So let's get started with this first lab. So you'll see we're inside a Canvas LMS and we're in a student view here. Okay, and we've got this the series of graded assignments and then this set of labs as well. So we'll go into the first one. And so, as Sanjay mentioned, we support all sorts of configurations and inside a cloud environment, we support both AWS and Azure. And so in this first assignment, we're loading a pre-configured Azure environment. The learner is asked to inspect the environment on the left-hand side. So right now we're loading up, essentially a browser within this frame here, automatically logging the learner into the Azure environment. And this is a pre-configured environment. And the learner is asked to inspect the environment and answer some questions, right? And so this is a fairly simple lab and gives the learner the ability to walk around inside their environment, kind of inspect the different privileges they may have, take a look at subscriptions, try to launch some resources, that sort of thing, right? So with our cloud labs, each user gets their own AWS or Azure Sandbox account with pre-established budgets and policy constraints. So there's no need really for you to ask your learners to sign up for an AWS or Azure account on their own, right? They don't need to go and enter a credit card. We also pre-launch resources into an account, right? So for example, if you want all your learners to start with some virtual machine or a code development environment, you can define a stack to launch when a student shows up for the first time. We also have policy constraints, as Sanjay mentioned, so that students don't go beyond the requirements for the lab, right? And then also at the end of a lab, we will clean things up, right? So one of the big problems in the past has been, when a learner has their own AWS or Azure account, they may spin up resources, walk away for a few days, come back, and the resources are still running and incurring a lot of expense, right? And so one of the key benefits is that we are providing guardrails around both the policies, the resources that a learner can access, and then the budget, and then also we are also cleaning up and terminating the resources on their behalf. Okay, and so in this lab, we're asked to poke around the Azure environment, inspect the available resources, even launch the resources as required. And as Sanjay mentioned, we can also, ask some questions to the learner. The learner may answer a question or two, and figure out what services that they have access to, and so on. And once they are ready, they can do a submission, and this will go to our grading servers and then return a grade back. Okay, and so we got the first answer correct, and we didn't answer any of the other ones. Okay, and so so this kind of gives you an idea of, okay, one way to craft a project or an assignment that leverages the lab environment, asks the learners to do a few things, and then checks their understanding or their ability to solve a problem. Okay, so we'll go into the next lab, and this one is a little more sophisticated. Okay, and this is an AWS lab assignment, and many of you may not know it, but if you're part of AWS Educate or AWS Academy programs, you're already using AWS Labs, right? They're using Vocareum as the infrastructure to deliver the lab environment, as well as the instructions and auto grading for their labs. Okay, and so what we have here is, we can expand this to full screen here. So what we have here is an example where we're asking the student to set up a simple static website, and we've already launched the lab, and on the left-hand side, there's a console. And so if we wanted to, we can we have credentials to, credentials to AWS already, right? And so we can, write CLI if we're comfortable with that, or we can also launch into a new tab in AWS console. Okay, and similar to the Azure console that we had embedded inside our lab, this one we can launch into a separate tab as well. So you can do it both ways. We can have an embedded experience, so it's pretty clean and inside this iframe, or we can launch into a separate console, so you have a larger palette to work with. Okay, and again, this example is actually, if you do a submission, what we'll do is actually trigger a grading script. Okay, in the previous example where we were showing some questions and some simple questions, here we're actually asking the learner to do some work, right? And so they need to go into the AWS console and set up a S3 bucket. So I got zeros because I didn't do any work. But we can ask them to set up a console and do a little bit of work, create a database or whatnot, and the grading server will actually go out to the learner's environment, query the environment, and then provide a score back. Okay, and so the scores would have been, 5 if I actually created a bucket, and another 10 points if I, put the contents in the bucket and made it visible to the world. Okay, so I'm going to go and move on to the next lab. And this lab is actually a data science programming lab, right? Where we have a Jupyter Notebook installed and hosted on the Vocareum infrastructure. Okay, and so we support Jupyter Notebook. As Sanjay was mentioning, we support Jupyter Notebooks, Jupyter Lab, RStudio, MySQL Workbench, a lot of different tools and packages and web apps are all fully installed and managed on our infrastructure. We can also allow you to bring your own containers and AMIs for virtual machines as well. But in this case, we're using an environment that we've already installed over 500 packages, so your learners can get started right away. Right, and so right now we've got a Jupyter assignment, and the intent, of course, is to go and and write some factorial functions using recursion here, right? And we can go and run some cells. Okay, and as we go down, you'll see, there's a few cells that are asking for an answer. Okay, and so we can go and update this. Say 3. Let's see. And checks. Nope, that's the incorrect answer. Go put 6 in there, and that looks okay. So there's also an auto-graded cell here. Okay, and so this is what Sanjay was mentioning earlier, which is we have some integration with with an MB grader, which allows us to pre-process a notebook and then allow the instructors to instrument a notebook with some auto-graded cells that will evaluate the student work, and we'll pre-process it, extract these cells, and then deliver this notebook to the learner. And when the learner is done with their work, they can do a submission, and we will automatically check the work based on what's inside the cells here. Okay, and so there's a few other exercises that the learner is supposed to go through, and when they're ready, they can go do a submission. And again, this gets sent to our grading server, and some grades will come back. And so I'll give it a few seconds here. It's doing a little bit of work. And so we got a score of 1 for the first test. The other 2 tests we have not completed. And so this one was asking us to write a factorial function using recursion, and then a factorial function using an iterative approach. And so we're not going to do that during this demo, but this is just giving you an example of this environment, this experience. And again, this is all built into an LTI integration into Canvas here. Okay, and so as we move on, let's see. So we took a look at the graded assignments here, and of course, we can also provide labs that are ungraded, and it could be with or without pre-configured content. Okay, so for example, here we've got a lab that's purely just a Jupyter container lab. Okay, a Jupyter lab environment, right? And so I'll give it a second here. So we're not providing any instructions or any starter code, but the student is free to use this environment as required, right? Including bringing in their own code, copying files, installing packages or extensions or whatnot, right? And so, for example, here, we can open up a file. We could have, and this is, I had preloaded this earlier. I can also bring in other files. I can, open up a terminal here. And if I needed to, I can also enable some extensions, for example, right? So I can enable an extension, look for an extension, see table of contents. So for example, I can say I want to install this table of contents extension. Oops. Oh, I gotta do a reload here. After I turn on the extensions, I need to reload it, and then I can add in the extensions. And then beyond that, we can also install lots of different packages on the in the lab. So we can look for table of contents. Oops. Install here. Uh-oh. Huh. Something happened here. Not sure why that is not working right now, but move on. So inside this Jupyter environment, as I mentioned, you could launch a terminal, or you can switch over to the Jupyter Classic mode as well. So this is to Jupyter Classic here. Okay, and let's go over to another lab here. And here I wanted to show you our DevOps lab, which basically, where all the other labs were launching kind of managed applications, we can also launch virtual machines, right? And so I've already preloaded 3 virtual machines here. Usually they take 5-10 minutes to launch, so I've launched it before the demo, and so I've got 3 machines. These are all Linux and PCs. I think we can go and launch into a terminal. So I can go into a terminal for this. This is a Linux machine here. I can also go and launch into the desktop as well. Okay, and so when we launch the desktop, cancel these. And so now we're inside a full Windows desktop. Or this is a Ubuntu desktop, I'm sorry. And of course you can launch another browser or launch whatever applications. We have some of our customers who are teaching Linux or Linux administration or Kubernetes administration, doing cybersecurity labs, and we can launch a Kali Linux environment. We can launch a Windows virtual machine, and they could all be networked and kind of secured in a range, a cyber range of some sort. And of course, when the learners are done, we'll automatically tear down the whole range. Okay, and from here, I wanted to switch over to a teacher view so that you could see what we're doing and how we're configuring some of these labs. And so let me switch over here. So this is in a native Vocareum environment, and this is the same labs that we had just gone through, but it is from a teacher perspective here. Okay, and so if we take a look at the Azure graded lab, okay, we have the labs on the left-hand side. This is the configuration for this assignment. And you'll see that there's each assignment can have 1 or more parts. This has a container lab with a cloud resource for Azure. We have the session length of about 90 minutes and a budget of $5 per learner. And then there's a lot of interface details that we can add. We can, enable or disable start and stop buttons, timers, lots of different things here. Okay, as you recall, inside this Azure lab, we had some multiple choice questions on the right-hand side. And so if we go into configure workspace, you'll see that we have a docs directory here, which we wrote this multiple choice question in a very simple markdown. It's essentially an extended markdown format. Okay, and so for the first question, what is the name of the subscription for your user? We have some radio boxes, and we are also indicating the correct answer with the X here. Okay, and so within this lab that has been pre-configured, we're enabling virtual machines, SQL databases, and Cosmos DB, but not blockchain DynamoDB, for example. Okay, and so once the teacher has defined the multiple choice questions, we can generate that quiz. Okay, and so after the quiz is generated, then that gets published to the learner. Okay, and so there's some pre-processing here to ensure that that we're generating. So essentially, when we generate the quiz, we're actually putting the multiple choice questions inside an HTML. We create an HTML which has the questions that are presented to the learners. Okay, so that's for an Azure graded lab. If we take a look at the AWS lab, as I mentioned before, this AWS lab, we are grading it based on an inspection of the learner environment. Okay, and inside this this directory here, we have a submit script. Okay, oops, why is it no? Something happened here. There's usually a submit script here, and I'm not sure why this lab is failing here. But we'll take a look at another script here. Let's see. So for example, inside this this Python example, we have submission and grading scripts. So this is essentially a script of some sort, and with our AWS lab, what we did was using credentials, going and using CLIs, calling out to the AWS environment and querying to see whether different resources are available, right? And in this case, we're just doing a very simple grading example of for Python. Okay, if we go back over to the auto-graded Jupyter lab, we have an environment here where we can switch over to the Jupyter server, and I'll show you what the auto-grading looks like here. Okay, and so if you recall, oops, this is not the right one, sorry. It was, that's strange. Yeah, so here we've got auto-graded cells, and this is not the exact notebook, but we've got hidden cells, and this is where the pre-processing happens. We go and generate the auto-graded cells. And then this gives us an example of the multiple VMs for the DevOps lab, and this is set up. We've got this Kubernetes lab set up, and we can go and again specify the session length, the end lab behavior, maximum time budgets, and so on. So at this point, just wanted to recap. We have kind of gone through a bunch of the different assignments and labs that are integrated. It could be integrated through LTI into any LMS. And we have labs that are automated, as well as labs that are essentially free-form sandboxes for learners to play with.